The first insult of the evening was not spoken aloud. It was written in silver forks, crystal glasses, and the cold arithmetic of a dinner table where the Duchess of Westmere had been placed 3 seats too far from her husband. London, 1817, glittered beyond the tall windows of Westmere House as if all of Mayfair had been polished for inspection. Carriage lamps rolled past in the mist. Candles trembled in their gilt branches. Footmen in powdered hair moved with silent precision along the walls, their trays steady, their eyes trained to see nothing. At the head of the table sat Gideon Ainsworth, Duke of Westmere, a man whose stillness commanded more obedience than another man's temper. He wore black evening dress, a white cravat tied with severe perfection, and an expression that gave away nothing. At the lower curve of the table, half veiled by a high arrangement of pale hothouse flowers, sat his wife. Lady Honoria Bellamy, Duchess of Westmere, knew exactly what her place should have been. Everyone in that room knew it. That was what made the insult so elegant. No voice had been raised. No rule had been openly broken. Lady Cecily Ardane had merely smiled at the butler, touched 2 place cards with her gloved fingers, and arranged the evening so that Honoria, mistress of the house in name, became almost decorative. A blue silk gown, a quiet profile, a wedding ring catching candlelight whenever she reached for her glass. Nothing more. Honoria kept her spine straight. That had become her greatest skill since marrying Westmere. She had learned how to sit through silence without seeming wounded by it. She had learned how to accept neglect without making it visible. She had learned that a duchess could be praised for composure while slowly being erased. "Your Grace," Lady Cecily said from Gideon's right, where Honoria should have sat, "you have outdone yourself. I do not think even your late mother hosted a more graceful table." Gideon inclined his head. "Mrs. Havisham deserves the credit. The household runs with admirable discipline." Honoria looked down at her soup spoon. Mrs. Havisham was the housekeeper. An excellent woman. A capable woman. But Honoria had spent 2 mornings reviewing the menu after Cecily had declared herself too fatigued to be useful. She had corrected the wine order, replaced the wilting lilies, and prevented Lord Osbert Vale from being seated beside a baronet's widow he had once insulted in Bath. No one knew. That was the trouble with invisible labor. If performed well, it looked as though it had never happened at all. Across the table, Lord Osbert leaned back with the easy carelessness of a man born near enough to power to mistake himself for powerful. He was the younger son of the Marquis of Vale, handsome in a polished, idle way, with pale eyes that enjoyed discomfort when it belonged to someone else. "Discipline is the secret of every great house," he said. "Though I confess, Westmere, I had imagined marriage would soften the edges of yours." A few guests smiled. Honoria felt the faintest tightening beneath her ribs. She did not look at Gideon. Looking had become dangerous. In the first months of their marriage, she had looked too often. She had looked for warmth when he entered a room. She had looked for recognition when she spoke. She had looked for some small sign that the man she had married saw her as more than an agreement sign between families. She had stopped eventually. One did not press one's hand repeatedly to a locked door and call it hope. Gideon's gaze passed over the table, measured and cool. "Marriage has not altered my opinion that a household functions best when sentiment is kept from interfering with order." Lady Cecily laughed softly. "How very Westmere of you." Honoria lifted her glass, not to drink, but to give her hand something to do. The ring on her finger turned beneath the candlelight. The Westmere ring was older than any love that had ever been offered with it. Gold worn smooth at the edges. A dark sapphire set low, not ostentatious, but unmistakable. Gideon had placed it on her hand in the chapel at Larchford Hall nearly a year ago. His fingers had been steady. His voice had been steady. Everything about him had been steady, except the distance in his eyes. She had told herself then that affection could grow in the shelter of duty. She had been raised to believe many gentle lies. "Her Grace has brought refinement to Westmere House," said Lady Elspeth Vane, an elderly cousin with more kindness than influence. The music room was quite transformed this season. "Indeed," Cecily replied before Gideon could speak. "Honoria has a very good eye for quiet improvements. One hardly notices them until they are pointed out. Quiet improvements." Honoria felt the compliment land like a pin beneath silk. It was one of Cecily's gifts, to praise a woman in a way that reduced her. Cecily Ardain had come to Westmere House 3 months after Honoria's wedding under the excuse of family affection and delicate nerves. She had never left for longer than a fortnight. She knew which servants feared dismissal, which guests repeated gossip, which older ladies preferred obedience in young wives, and which words could wound without leaving evidence. Gideon trusted her because she had known his family since childhood. London admired her because she never appeared to want what she was taking. Honoria turned her ring once around her finger. She did it slowly, beneath the table, where no one could see. A foolish habit. A private signal to herself that she was still present. "I am glad the music room pleases you," she said. Her voice was calm. It had been shut for too long. Gideon's eyes moved to her then. Briefly. Sharp grey eyes, thoughtful and unreadable. The look lasted no more than a heartbeat, yet it unsettled her more than neglect. When he looked at her fully, she remembered the danger of wanting to be understood by him. "Do you play, Duchess?" asked Sir Edmund Pike, a country gentleman newly admitted to this level of society and too sincere to recognize the currents around him. "A little," Honoria said. "A dangerous answer," Osbert said. "When a lady says she plays a little, she either means she plays beautifully or she intends to punish the room with modesty." Gideon's expression cooled. "Lord Osbert, my wife has never punished a room with anything." The words were mild. The effect was immediate. Osbert's smile thinned. Lady Cecily lowered her eyes to her plate. Honoria should have felt defended. She did feel something. A small, unwelcome warmth. Then Gideon looked away, and the warmth had nowhere to go. That was how it had always been. He noticed enough to prevent discourtesy, never enough to offer tenderness. He shielded the title, perhaps the woman when necessary, but never the ache inside the woman. A footman placed a dish before her. Honoria thanked him quietly and realized she had eaten almost nothing. Across the gleam of silver and porcelain, Gideon noticed too. His eyes rested on her untouched plate, then shifted to the butler. A nearly invisible movement of his fingers followed. Moments later, the dish nearest Honoria was replaced with the one she had favored at last month's supper, sole with lemon and herbs, prepared lightly. She had mentioned liking it once to Mrs. Havisham. Not to Gideon. Never to Gideon. Honoria stared at the plate for 1 second too long. The gesture was so small that she could almost pretend she had imagined it. Almost. Lady Cecily saw the exchange. Of course she did. Her smile did not change, but something sharpened behind it. "How attentive you are to the household, Westmere," she said. It must be a comfort to her Grace, having so little burden placed upon her. Honoria placed her hand flat in her lap. The ring pressed into her glove. "A house of this size gives everyone a burden, Lady Cecily." "Naturally," Cecily said. "Though some carry theirs with more feeling than others." Silence brushed the table. Not full silence. Not yet. Only the slight thinning of conversation that came when well-bred people smelled embarrassment and leaned closer without appearing to do so. Gideon's jaw tightened. Honoria saw it because she had spent a year learning the language of his restraint. A tightened jaw meant displeasure. A lowered voice meant danger. A still hand beside the wineglass meant he was deciding whether a person deserved correction. Once, she had wondered what sign would mean affection. She had never found it. "Her Grace carries what is required," Gideon said. The sentence was not cruel. It was not kind either. It reduced marriage to competence, and competence was a cold room in which to live. Lady Cecily tilted her head. "I meant no criticism. I only observe that some marriages are built upon warmer foundations than others." Lord Osbert chuckled. "Warm foundations are for poets and debtors. A ducal marriage is a matter of sense." "And endurance," Cecily added lightly. Honoria's breath caught. The word was too close. Endure. The same word that had chilled Gideon's manner toward her from the early weeks of their marriage, though she had never known why. She had once overheard him in the library speaking with his solicitor, his voice flat as winter glass. "I understand perfectly what her Grace believes she must endure." After that, he had become unfailingly courteous and impossibly distant. No accusation. No explanation. Only a wall where a marriage should have been. Gideon set down his glass. The sound was soft, but it reached every ear. Enough. Cecily's lashes lifted. My dear cousin, I was only speaking generally. Then speak generally of something else. There it was again. Protection, shaped like command. Honoria should have been grateful. Instead, the loneliness inside her deepened. He would stop an insult. He would not ask why it had found her so easily. Conversation resumed in cautious fragments. A question about the opera. A remark about Almack's. A complaint about the damp spring air. Honoria answered when addressed. She smiled when required. She sat beneath the chandeliers with the old sapphire on her hand and the weight of a year behind her eyes. To anyone watching from the doorway, she would have appeared serene. That was the greatest triumph of her training. Her ruin would always look like manners. Then Lady Cecily leaned slightly toward Gideon, her voice sweet enough to pass as innocence and clear enough to carry. Surely your grace must admit marriage has brought you some comfort. Lady Cecily's question did not seem dangerous at first. It drifted over the polished table with the sweetness of sugared fruit, light enough to be dismissed, sharp enough to remain. Surely your grace must admit marriage has brought you some comfort. For 1 second, no one answered. Forks paused above porcelain. A footman stilled near the sideboard with a silver salver held level in both hands. The candles burned steadily, but Honoria felt the room lean toward her husband. Not toward her. Never toward her. Toward Gideon, whose silence had the strange power to make every other sound appear impertinent. He sat with one hand beside his wineglass, his long fingers relaxed, his face composed. Honoria knew that face. She had seen it across breakfast tables, in carriages, at the opera, and in the long gallery at Larchford Hall when they had walked past portraits of dead Ainsworth men who looked as though they, too, had mistaken feeling for weakness. Comfort, Gideon repeated. The single word held no warmth. A broad term, Lady Cecily. Cecily gave a little laugh, soft and carefully careless. Perhaps I should have said companionship. Lord Osbert Vale leaned forward before the silence could settle. A wife is meant to provide that, is she not? Even a ducal wife. Or have the modern ladies abandoned that duty as well? A few guests smiled because it was safer to smile than to decide whether they had been invited to witness humor or cruelty. Honoria placed her spoon upon the saucer without sound. Her hand remained steady. She had practiced steadiness until it had become a second pulse. Gideon's eyes did not move to her this time. They stayed on Lord Osbert. You speak often of duties that do not belong to you. Osbert's smile faltered. I meant no offense, Westmere. Then take care not to find one by accident. The rebuke was precise. It should have ended the matter. It would have ended the matter had Cecily not possessed the rare talent of making retreat look like innocence. She lowered her gaze as though chastened, then touched the stem of her glass. Forgive us. We tease because her grace is so very composed. It is difficult not to wonder whether any of us could disturb her peace if we tried. Honoria felt the word settle upon her skin. Her peace. What an elegant fiction. There were many names for what she had learned in this house: discipline, manners, prudence, self-command. Peace was not among them. Peace did not wake before dawn with a question already lodged in the throat. Peace did not sit across from a husband and wonder what crime one had committed by being unwanted. Gideon's profile remained carved and pale in candlelight. He had heard. She knew he had heard because the line of his mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Yet he did not look at her. That was worse than anger. It was the old distance, the distance that had entered their marriage like a draught beneath a closed door. At the far end of the table, Sir Edmund Pike cleared his throat with the nervous courage of a man trying to rescue a conversation above his rank. Her Grace's composure does the household credit, I should think. Indeed, Cecily said. Credit is precisely the word. Honoria's fingers curved around her napkin. She could not decide whether Cecily meant money, reputation, or debt. With Cecily, a compliment always arrived wearing gloves. Gideon lifted his glass, but he did not drink. His mind had gone elsewhere. Honoria could see it in the subtle withdrawal of his gaze. It was one of the few intimacies left to her that she could recognize his absence while he remained in the room. He was remembering something. She did not know what. He did. A sheet of paper, folded twice. A line written in a hand almost identical to hers. A phrase that had lodged in him like a splinter, a tolerable bargain. He had read those words 11 months ago in his library at Larchford Hall, 3 weeks after the wedding, when rain had pressed against the windows and his new wife had been upstairs unpacking books as if she intended to make a home of his house. The letter had been found among correspondence misdirected from the morning room. Cecily had brought it with hesitation arranged perfectly upon her face. "I don't want to distress you, Gideon," she had said then. "But it's better that you know what she thinks of this marriage." He had believed the ink because it asked less of him than hope. It was easier to believe Honoria cold than to risk discovering she was not. Easier to withdraw first, to turn duty into a wall, to become untouchable before she could despise him openly. Now, at his own table, under Cecily's quiet pressure and Osbert's amused stare, that old humiliation returned disguised as certainty. Honoria saw something harden in him. It frightened her, not because it was loud, but because it was silent. "The Duchess," Gideon said, "understands the arrangement perfectly." Honoria's breath thinned. She had heard him use that word before. Arrangement. It was a word men used when they wished to bury a living thing without naming it dead. Cecily tilted her head. How fortunate. Some women mistake a coronet for affection and then suffer when affection does not obey them. Her Grace is not sentimental, Osbert said. No one has accused her of that. Another faint ripple of amusement travelled down the table. It stopped before it reached Gideon, but it had already reached Honoria. She could feel it gathering around the flowers, around the silver, around the sapphire on her hand. She had not moved, yet suddenly it seemed she had been placed upon a small stage. "No," Cecily murmured. "Her Grace is sensible. She has always seemed to me a lady who knows how to endure what benefits her." The word struck again. Endure. This time Gideon looked down the table. His eyes found Honoria at last. For one suspended instant, there was no dinner party, no guests, no clever cousin smiling over crystal. There was only the space between husband and wife, narrow enough for a glance, wide enough for a year of loneliness. Honoria did not look away. Something in Gideon's expression shifted, almost softened, and then Lord Osbert spoke again. "That sounds very like a compliment to Westmere. A tolerable husband, a tolerable wife, and a tolerable peace. What more could English society ask?" Cecily's lips parted as if to protest. She did not. She watched Gideon instead. Everyone did. The Duke of Westmere, whose name could quiet a drawing-room and redirect a family's future, sat under the invisible weight of a forged sentence he had never questioned aloud. Pride came to his rescue before wisdom could reach him. "You mistake the matter," Gideon said. His voice was low, controlled, and terribly clear. "I do not require comfort from her Grace." Honoria's hand tightened beneath the table. Gideon continued before any mercy could interrupt him. "I only tolerate her." The room changed. It did not erupt. Aristocratic rooms seldom did. They cooled. They sharpened. A small laugh escaped one of the younger ladies and died almost at once. Someone's fork touched a plate with a delicate click. A footman lowered his eyes. Lord Osbert's mouth curved, then froze when Gideon turned his head toward him. Cecily looked down, but not quickly enough. Honoria saw triumph flicker across her face like candlelight over a knife. For a moment, Honoria heard nothing but the blood moving in her ears. The words did not strike all at once. They entered with a strange politeness, as if asking permission to destroy her. She had suspected. She had feared. She had even told herself, on nights when Gideon did not come to the small sitting room where she waited with tea gone cold, that tolerance might be the best a woman could expect from a man who had married for family duty. But suspicion was a shadow. Spoken truth had weight. It sat before her in public, wearing her husband's voice. Gideon looked at her. He had realized it. Too late. His face, which had resisted every softer feeling she had ever searched for, lost color. His hand moved on the table, not toward the wineglass now, not toward Cecily, not toward command. Toward her. Only an inch. Only enough to reveal that he had meant to call something back and found the air empty. Honoria, he said. It was the first time that evening he had used her name. Not Duchess. Not Her Grace. Honoria. She almost closed her eyes. Almost. But Cecily was watching. Osbert was watching. The guests were watching with the ravenous delicacy of people who would swear tomorrow that they had seen nothing improper. Honoria had been trained for rooms like this. She knew how to survive them. She lifted her chin a fraction, neither high enough to challenge nor low enough to submit. Her mouth did not tremble. Her eyes remained dry. Only her hand moved beneath the table, where the white glove covered the finger Gideon had once ringed without tenderness. The sapphire pressed cold and certain against her skin. She looked at him, and whatever he saw in her face made him go completely still. It was not rage. Rage would have been warmer. It was not pleading. She had spent the last of that long ago. It was the quiet withdrawal of a woman who had finally heard the door close from the other side. "Please continue your dinner," she said, her voice gentle enough to shame the room. "I would not wish to disturb what your grace merely tolerates." No one breathed. Gideon's lips parted, but no answer came. Honoria lowered her gaze to her right hand. Slowly, with perfect care, she drew the glove loose from each finger. The kid leather whispered against her skin. The sapphire caught the candlelight once, dark blue and depthless. Then her bare fingertip settled upon the ring. The sapphire did not come free at once. For one terrible moment, the ring resisted her, as though the old gold had learned the habits of the house and believed a duchess should remain where she had been placed. Honoria kept her face composed. She would not tug at it. She would not give the room the satisfaction of struggle. She turned the ring slowly, once, twice, feeling the slight warmth of her own skin beneath the metal, and remembered the day Gideon had placed it there before the altar at Larchford Hall. His hand had been steady then. Her heart had not. She had thought steadiness meant strength. She knew better now. Around the table, no one moved. Even Lady Cecily's smile had thinned into something watchful. Lord Osbert Vale leaned back just enough to appear amused, but his eyes had sharpened with the delight of a man who sensed scandal arriving in a proper carriage. Gideon was still standing half out of his chair, one hand braced against the edge of the table. He had not risen fully. Perhaps some part of him still believed the world could be held in place if he did not move too quickly. "Honoria," he said again, lower this time. "Don't." The word reached her across silver, glass, candlelight, and every careful silence of the past year. "Do not what?" "Do not embarrass him? Do not make visible what he had already made public? Do not place a consequence beside his words where all could see it?" She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw something like fear beneath his control. It might have touched her once. It might have undone her once. Tonight it arrived too late. "Do not be alarmed, Your Grace," she said. Her voice was soft, almost courteous. "I have had a great deal of practice doing only what is tolerable." A breath moved through the room. Not quite a gasp. Better bred than that. More poisonous. The kind of collective intake that would become a dozen versions of the story by morning. Lady Cecily lowered her chin, but Honoria saw the quick flash of calculation in her eyes. Cecily was already arranging the tale. The cold wife. The offended duke. The dramatic gesture. The proof that Honoria had never valued her place. Honoria could almost hear the phrases being folded and sealed. Her finger gave one final turn. The ring slipped free. The absence shocked her more than the removal. Her hand felt lighter, and that lightness hurt. The gold lay in her palm, dark sapphire upward, no larger than a coin and yet heavy enough to break a year open. Gideon took one step around his chair. "This is not necessary." "No," Honoria said. "It is not necessary. That is why I am doing it." She placed the ring on the white tablecloth beside her untouched wineglass. She did not drop it. She set it down carefully, as one might set down an heirloom that belonged to a house rather than a heart. The sapphire caught the candlelight and threw back a small, cold gleam. Every eye followed it. A duchess might conceal tears. A wife might deny a wound. But a ring on a table could not be explained away as nerves. It sat there, undeniable. Lord Osbert's mouth curved again. "Well," he murmured, not quite softly enough, "that is a novel way to end a dinner." Gideon turned his head. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Another word, veil, and you will discover how swiftly novelty can become regret. The smile vanished from Osbert's face. Several guests looked down at their plates. Lady Cecily reached for composure as if it were a fan she had misplaced. "My dear Honoria," she said, sweetly alarmed, "surely you do not mean to make a spectacle of private discomfort. You're distressed. Anyone can see it. Let us help you sit down before this becomes something impossible to mend." Honoria looked at her. For almost a year, she had endured Cecily's gentle corrections, her rearranged rooms, her borrowed authority, her talent for making cruelty sound like concern. Honoria had answered with patience because she had believed patience was dignity. Tonight she understood that dignity sometimes required a woman to stand. "A woman may be tolerated in silence, Lady Cecily," she said, "but she need not remain seated for the convenience of others." The room went very still. Cecily's hand froze around her glass. Gideon's face changed again, not with anger. With recognition. As though he had heard the sentence and understood, at last, that his words had not merely wounded his wife. They had freed her from the obligation to pretend she was not wounded. Honoria rose. Her chair barely sounded against the carpet. A footman moved instinctively toward her, then stopped, uncertain whether assisting a departing duchess would be service or treason. Honoria spared him that discomfort. She took her glove in one hand, gathered no attention she did not already possess, and inclined her head to the table with perfect grace. "Forgive me," she said. "I find I am not hungry." No one answered. Lady Elspeth Vane's eyes shone with helpless sympathy, but she lacked the power to intervene. Sir Edmund Pike looked stricken. The others looked fascinated and ashamed of their fascination. Honoria walked toward the door. Each step required less strength than she had feared and more courage than anyone in that room would ever know. The flowers no longer hid her. The candles no longer flattered the scene into beauty. She could feel Gideon behind her before he moved, a force gathering too late. "Honoria, wait." She did not turn. Not here. It was the only mercy she could offer him. Or perhaps the last boundary she could offer herself. The butler opened the dining room door with the pale face of a man who had witnessed history and wished to be blamed for none of it. Honoria crossed the threshold into the corridor, where the air felt cooler and cleaner. The noise of the dining room remained trapped behind her for a moment, then broke as Gideon's chair struck back. He followed. Behind him, voices stirred and died. Cecily's voice rose softly, trying to reclaim the room, but Gideon's next words cut through even the closing door. "No one will speak of her grace with amusement." That sentence followed Honoria down the corridor like a cloak offered after the rain had already soaked through. She did not stop. Westmere House stretched before her in polished marble and ancestral portraits, every inch of it grand, correct, and suddenly foreign. A footman hurried ahead to signal for her carriage. She moved past the blue drawing room, past the music room whose curtain she had chosen, past a tall mirror in which she saw a pale woman in silk with one bare hand and one gloved hand, looking almost like a stranger escaping a portrait. At the foot of the staircase, Gideon caught up, though he stopped several feet away, respecting distance because he had no right now to close it. "You cannot leave like this," he said. The command failed before it reached her. He seemed to hear that himself. His voice altered. "Please. Let me speak." Honoria faced him. Without the audience, the pain threatened to become larger. She held it down with both hands, though only one was visible. "You have spoken." His eyes flicked to her empty finger. "I was wrong." The words came quickly, almost roughly, as if they had torn free before pride could stop them. "I should not have said it." "No," she replied. "You should not have believed it." Gideon went still. The line struck something deeper than the insult. She saw it in the way his expression closed, not against her, but against a thought he did not wish to examine. For the first time, Honoria wondered whether his coldness had not been indifference alone, but accusation. An accusation she had never heard. An accusation she had been answering for without knowing the charge. The thought chilled her more than the corridor air. "What do you mean?" he asked. She almost laughed. It would have sounded broken, so she did not. "I mean that a man does not speak so clearly by accident." Outside, carriage wheels sounded over the stones. The front doors opened, and damp night air entered the hall. Honoria drew on her glove with deliberate care, covering the hand that no longer bore his ring. "Where will you go?" Gideon asked. The question was softer than any he had asked her in months. That softness was the cruelest thing yet. "To someone who will not mistake my endurance for consent." He flinched. Only slightly. But she saw it. A footman stood by the open door, eyes lowered. Beyond him, the carriage lamps glowed in the mist like two small warnings. Honoria stepped past Gideon. He did not seize her arm. He did not block her path. Some old instinct in him understood that if he stopped her body, he would lose whatever remained beyond it. She entered the carriage without looking back. Only when the door closed did her breath tremble. Through the window, she saw Gideon standing on the steps of Westmere House, black against the gold-lit doorway, a duke surrounded by power and emptied by one absence. The carriage began to move. Inside the dining room, the ring still lay on the white cloth. Gideon returned for it moments later, though he would never remember crossing the hall. The guests fell silent as he entered. Cecily had been speaking, her hands folded, her face arranged into sorrow. She stopped at once. Gideon did not look at her. He went to Honoria's abandoned place and picked up the ring. The gold was warm from her hand. That warmth broke something no accusation could have touched. His fingers closed around it, and for the first time in nearly a year, the Duke of Westmere looked less like a man in command than a husband who had arrived too late to the truth of his own marriage. By the time Lady Honoria Bellamy reached Bloomsbury, the mist had thickened into a pale veil over the street lamps, and the wheels of her carriage sounded too loud in the narrow square. The houses here did not glitter like Mayfair. They stood with quieter dignity, brick-faced and dark-windowed, respectable without demanding applause. Honoria had always liked that about her aunt's neighborhood. It did not pretend to be the center of England. It simply endured, which tonight felt less like weakness than survival. Her carriage stopped before a narrow townhouse with a brass knocker shaped like a laurel wreath. Before the footman could fully lower the step, the front door opened, and Lady Maud Bellamy appeared in a plain dark gown with a shawl thrown over her shoulders and a candle in one hand. She was the unmarried daughter of the late Earl of Bellamy, a woman who had refused 3 proposals, survived 2 family scandals, and grown into a sort of freedom that London did not know whether to pity or envy. She took one look at Honoria's uncovered hand and asked no foolish questions. "Come inside, child." That was all. The kindness of it nearly undid Honoria. Not sympathy. Not alarm. Not the horrid appetite of curiosity. Just shelter, offered without performance. Honoria crossed the threshold, and the door closed behind her with a final sound that seemed to cut Westmere House away from the night. The entrance hall was small, the wallpaper a little faded, the carpet worn at the turn of the stairs, and the air smelled faintly of beeswax, lavender, and the coal fire burning in the drawing room. It was not grand. It was safe. Lady Maud led her inside and gave one sharp glance to her own maid. "Tea. Brandy as well. No one is to wake the cook, and no one is to repeat that her grace is here. If any servant in this house has loose lips, I shall find them before breakfast." The maid curtsied and vanished. Honoria remained standing in the middle of the drawing room, still wearing blue silk and one glove, as if she had stepped out of a ballroom portrait and into a plainer, truer life. Her bare hand looked wrong without the ring. She folded it into the glove until Lady Maud crossed the room and gently took both from her. "Do not hide it from me." Honoria swallowed. "I left it there." "Good." The word startled her into looking up. Lady Maud's face was lined, intelligent, and unsentimental. A woman should not carry an emblem that has been used as a chain. He did not mean all of it, Honoria said, and hated herself for offering the defense before anyone had requested it. Lady Maud's expression did not soften, but her voice did. My dear, men of rank often do not mean the wound. They only mean to preserve the pride that caused it. The maid returned with the tray. Honoria sat because her knees had begun to tremble at last, and she would not fall. Not tonight. She had stood through the dinner. She had walked out before them all. She had reached this house without weeping in front of a footman. That was enough dignity for one evening. The moment the maid left, Lady Maud poured tea, added a measure of brandy, and placed the cup in Honoria's hands. Drink. Honoria obeyed. The warmth struck her throat and made the room blur. I have made a scandal. No. The Duke made one. You gave it a shape. Silence followed. Honoria stared into the cup and saw, not tea, but candlelight on a sapphire, the ring resting beside untouched wine, Gideon's face when he realized she had heard him. He looked frightened, she whispered. That may be the first useful emotion he has shown. Aunt. Do not aunt me. I have watched proud men discover consequences before. It improves very few of them unless the woman stops softening the blow. Honoria tried to smile, but it failed. I do not know what I am now. Lady Maud sat opposite her. You are the Duchess of Westmere until the law, the church, and your own choice say otherwise. You are my niece before that. You are a woman before either. We shall begin there. The word steadied Honoria more than comfort would have done. Comfort invited collapse. Lady Maud offered a floor beneath her feet. A clock struck somewhere in the house. Midnight had not yet come, though the evening felt as if it had lasted years. Honoria had just set down her cup when the knocker sounded below. Once. Then again. The maid's hurried footsteps crossed the hall. Lady Maud did not move. That will be him. Honoria's fingers tightened around the saucer. I cannot see him. Then you shall not. He is the Duke of Westmere. And this is my house. The simplicity of that statement might have been absurd in another woman's mouth. From Lady Maud, it carried the force of law. A moment later, the maid appeared at the drawing-room door with a calling card on a small tray, her eyes carefully lowered. Lady Maud took it. Her brows rose. His Grace requests the honor of speaking with Her Grace, if she will receive him. The courtesy hurt more than command would have done. Gideon had followed propriety. He had not forced entry. He had sent a card like a gentleman calling at a reasonable hour, though nothing about the hour was reasonable. Lady Maud looked at Honoria. Well. Honoria closed her eyes for one breath. If she refused him completely, the night would remain a wound without language. If she received him, he might try to turn her pain into a problem to be solved for his house. She knew him well enough to fear that. She also knew herself well enough to refuse being hidden. I will see him, she said. Here. With you present. Lady Maud handed the card back to the maid. Show His Grace into the front drawing-room. Leave the door open until I enter. Then close it halfway. Not fully. The maid vanished. Honoria rose, then sat again because Lady Maud pointed to the chair. You do not stand to receive a man who has come to ask pardon. The front drawing-room was colder than the room behind it, used only for callers and minor family obligations. Honoria entered with Lady Maud at her side. Gideon stood near the hearth, hat in hand, black evening coat dampened faintly at the shoulders from the mist. He looked too large for the modest room, too severe among the faded curtains and small tables. Yet his power seemed altered here. At Westmere House, authority gathered around him like inheritance. In Lady Maud's drawing-room, he was simply a man who had arrived after doing harm. His eyes went first to Honoria's face, then to her hand. The absence of the ring struck him visibly. She saw his fingers close around something in his palm. The ring. He had brought it. Of course he had. Lady Maud, he said, bowing. I apologize for the hour. You should, Lady Maud replied. But apology for the hour is the least urgent apology in this room. His jaw tightened. He accepted the rebuke. That was new. May I speak with my wife? You may speak to her. You may not speak around me. Honoria almost turned to look at her aunt, but she kept her eyes on Gideon. He seemed to understand the terms. Honoria. Her name sounded different here, stripped of audience and title. I was wrong. Yes. He flinched, but continued. What I said at dinner was inexcusable. Yes. The second answer landed harder than the first. He looked down, then back at her. I did not intend to humiliate you. Intention is private. Humiliation had witnesses. Gideon went very still. Behind them, Lady Maud took a seat near the wall, close enough to be proper, distant enough to force them to carry their own words. Gideon's hand opened. The ring lay against his palm, dark sapphire turned toward her. Come home, and I will make certain no one speaks of tonight again. Something inside Honoria folded shut. There it was. The first instinct of a duke. Contain the scandal. Restore the walls. Silence the servants. Correct society. Bring the Duchess back to her chair before anyone noticed the crack in the house. For my sake, she asked, or for the house of Ainsworth? The question entered the room and changed the air. Gideon did not answer. Not quickly enough. Honoria's eyes burned, but she did not blink. Lady Maud made a small sound, not quite a sigh and not quite a warning. Gideon heard it. Shame crossed his face, sharper than regret. I do not know how to separate them, he said at last. Then you do not yet know how to apologize to me. He looked at her as if she had taken the ring from his hand a second time. Tell me what you require. That is not the same as asking what I feel. The words seemed to catch him unprepared. Honoria had never seen Gideon Ainsworth without an answer. It should have satisfied her. It did not. She was too tired for satisfaction. Too wounded for victory. I require nothing tonight, she said. I will remain here with my aunt. Tomorrow, if you still wish to speak, you may send a card during proper hours. Honoria, don't make this a battle between us. I did not begin a battle. Her voice was quiet. I merely stopped pretending there was peace. Gideon closed his hand around the ring. For one moment, she thought he would argue. A year ago, perhaps even 1 hour ago, he might have. Instead, he bowed his head. Then I will call tomorrow. He turned toward Lady Maud. Thank you for receiving me. I did not receive you for your comfort, your grace. No, he said. I understand. But Honoria was not sure he did. Not yet. At the door, he stopped. There is something you do not know, he said. Honoria's pulse changed. About what? His face had become guarded again, though not cold. Troubled. About why I believed you despised this marriage before I had given you reason to. The room seemed to narrow. Lady Maud leaned forward. Honoria felt the night gather itself around that single sentence. What are you speaking of? She asked. Gideon looked at the ring in his hand, then at her empty finger. A letter, he said. One I thought you had written. A letter, Gideon said, and for the first time since Honoria had known him, the word seemed to trouble him more than her silence. Lady Maud did not permit him to explain it in the middle of the night. She rose at once, small, straight, and immovable beneath her shawl, and told him that if he possessed evidence that had poisoned a marriage, he might have the decency to bring it in daylight and without the fog of a dinner scandal still clinging to his coat. Gideon accepted the rebuke with a bow so controlled that only Honoria saw the effort beneath it. He left with the ring closed inside his hand and the letter unnamed between them. Honoria slept very little. By morning, Bloomsbury looked washed and pale under a thin rain, and the front drawing-room had been prepared with the severity of a tribunal disguised as a social call. The curtains were open. The fire was modest. Lady Maud sat near the window with her embroidery untouched in her lap, a chaperone and a judge in one. Honoria wore a grey morning gown and no ornament except a narrow ribbon at her throat. Her left hand remained bare. She had considered wearing a glove, then decided against it. Let him see what his words had made visible. Gideon arrived at 11 o'clock, precisely within calling hours, and sent his card before entering. He had changed from evening black to dark morning dress, but no amount of tailoring could conceal the night from his face. He bowed to Lady Maud, then to Honoria. He did not come near enough to force intimacy. That restraint, once so natural to him, now looked like penance. "I have brought it," he said. From inside his coat he withdrew a folded sheet kept between two pieces of thicker paper, as if age or shame might crumble it. "I should have shown you long ago." Honoria looked at the letter, not at his face. "Yes," she said. "You should have." Lady Maud extended one hand. "Then let us begin with the object itself, rather than with a gentleman's interpretation of it." Gideon placed the packet on the small table between them. His fingers lingered for half a breath before he withdrew them. Honoria waited until Lady Maud nodded. Then she opened the outer paper and saw the letter that had apparently been living inside her marriage like a hidden illness. The handwriting struck first. It was hers. Or almost hers. The slant was correct, the spacing nearly so, the long downstrokes imitated with care. Her own name did not appear at the bottom, but the shape of the words made denial feel absurd before she had even read them. Her stomach tightened. She forced herself to continue. "My dear cousin," the letter began, "His Grace is every inch the Duke, which is to say he is proud, remote, and quite convinced of his own consequence. I do not complain. A coronet is a tolerable bargain, and a woman in my position may endure a great deal for the title secured by it." Honoria stopped reading. The room did not move, yet something in it seemed to fall. Gideon stood by the mantel, his gaze fixed on her hands. "There is more," he said quietly. "I remember enough." Her voice sounded calm to her own ears. That felt strange, given that her heart was beating hard enough to hurt. "You believed this?" His eyes rose. "I believed the hand. Not the wife." The answer struck him. She saw it. Good, she thought, then hated the thought, because pain should not have been the only language left between them. Lady Maud took the letter and read it without expression. "This is ugly work." "It is not mine," Honoria said. "I did not write those words." Gideon's breath changed. "Not relief." "Not yet." He was a man learning that relief could be another form of guilt. "I wanted to ask you." "But you did not." "No, why?" He looked at the fire. "Because I had already begun to fear that I had married a woman who regretted me." Honoria almost laughed, but the sound would have broken. "So you punish me for a regret I never expressed." I withdrew. That is a polite word for punishment when a husband has all the power in the house. Lady Maud's needle flashed once through the fabric in her lap, though she had not resumed sewing. "Well said." Gideon accepted that too. It made Honoria more uneasy than defensiveness would have done. He seemed prepared to be condemned, but remorse was not the same as truth. She looked back at the letter. The phrase about a coronet. The word endure. The cruel rhythm of the sentences. Then another feeling pierced the shock, narrow and bright. Recognition. "This sentence," she said. "Which?" Gideon asked. She pointed to the line with one steady finger. "A woman in my position may endure a great deal. I wrote something like that once." Gideon went still. "To whom?" "To my cousin, Miss Arabella Fane, before my wedding." She lifted the letter closer, scanning the altered words. "But not this. I wrote that a woman in my position may endure a great deal of uncertainty when she has been raised to understand duty before comfort. It was not about you. It was about leaving Bellamy Lodge. About leaving everything familiar." Lady Maud leaned forward. "And the phrase tolerable bargain?" Honoria shook her head slowly. "No. I wrote that the settlement was tolerable because my father's affairs had left little room for pride. I was ashamed even to mention it." Gideon's face hardened, though not against her. "Someone had access to your private correspondence." "Or to pieces of it," Honoria said. The idea made her skin prickle. "This is not merely forged. It is assembled. Someone took true phrases and dressed them in malice." Silence followed. It was not empty this time. It worked. It gathered evidence, motive, opportunity. Lady Maud held the letter nearer the window. "The paper is fine." Gideon nodded. "Westmere paper." Honoria looked up sharply. Not Bellamy paper? No. That was one of the reasons I should have questioned it. He took another folded sheet from the packet and placed it beside the first. Mr. Pember, my solicitor, saw it this morning before I came here. I sent a note to his chambers at dawn. He noticed the watermark. Honoria bent over the page. Near the lower edge, almost hidden and less tilted toward the light, was the faint mark pressed into the paper. A crest. Not the full ducal arms, but the private watermark used for Westmere House correspondence. This paper came from your house, she said. Yes. From my house, she corrected, and the word surprised them both. Gideon looked at her empty hand, then back at her face. Yes, he said. From your house. It was the first time he had yielded that ground without correction. The victory was too small to enjoy and too necessary to ignore. Lady Maud set the paper down. Who had access? Gideon answered at once. The butler. My secretary when in residence. Mrs. Havisham for household notes. Her Grace, of course. Lady Cecily had use of the morning room for correspondence when she stayed with us. Honoria heard the name, and the room sharpened. Lady Maud's expression did not change. That made it more telling. Lady Cecily, she repeated. How convenient. Gideon did not defend his cousin. That was new too. She brought me the letter. Honoria looked at him. The words moved slowly through her. She brought it to you. She said it had been misdirected among household correspondence. And you never asked why she opened a letter that seemed to be mine. His silence answered. The hurt that followed was colder than anger. Then we have both been living with a stranger made of ink, Honoria said. You with the woman that letter invented, and I with the husband who believed her. Gideon closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the grey had darkened with something like self-disgust. Let me repair this. No, she said. His head lifted. No. You may help uncover the truth. You may not repair me as if I were a cracked plate in your household. Lady Maud's mouth softened by the smallest degree. Honoria folded the forged letter along its old crease. Her hands no longer trembled. We begin with the paper. Then the seal. Then who knew enough of my private phrases to twist them? Gideon studied her as if he had expected tears and found command instead. I will have Mr. Pember examine the seal and ink. And I will write to Arabella, Honoria said. She may still have my original letter. If she does, we shall see what was stolen. Honoria, Gideon said softly. She paused, but did not look away. I am sorry. This time, the words did not feel like a strategy. They felt bare, insufficient, and real. Honoria let them stand between them without accepting or rejecting them. Then be useful, she said. Before he could answer, a knock sounded at the door, and Lady Maud's maid entered with a small card on a tray. A messenger has come from Mr. Pember, my lady. Gideon took the card with Lady Maud's permission. He read it once. The colour left his face in a slow, controlled retreat. What is it? Honoria asked. He handed her the card. Mr. Pember's neat hand filled only 2 lines. The watermark belongs to the private supply kept in the Westmere House morning room. It was not used for Bellamy family correspondence. Honoria looked from the card to the forged letter. For the first time since the dinner, her pain had a direction. Then, she said, we shall find who had the key. By noon, the first version of the story had already learned to walk without Honoria's consent. It crossed Mayfair in visiting carriages, slipped beneath gloved hands with folded calling cards, and appeared in a morning paper as a small society paragraph that named no names and accused everyone. A certain young duchess, lately admired for her composure, had removed a significant jewel at a dinner given by her husband, thereby inviting speculation as to whether dignity or discovery had prompted the gesture. Lady Maud read the sentence aloud at breakfast, then laid the paper down as if it had left a stain upon the tablecloth. Osbert Vale, she said. Honoria looked up from the note she had been writing to Arabella Fane. You are certain? A man who cannot inherit often tries to purchase importance by selling other people's discomfort. Lady Maud tapped the paper once. This has his odour. Honoria almost smiled, but the expression did not reach her eyes. She had slept only in fragments, and every fragment had opened into the same image, the forged letter beneath her fingers, the watermark near the lower edge, Gideon's face when he realized the paper had come from Westmere House. Pain, at least, had become less shapeless. That was not healing. It was direction. The bell sounded below before she could answer. Within 5 minutes, the hall tray carried 6 calling cards, then 8, then 11. Some belonged to ladies who had ignored Honoria for months. Some bore names of women who would come only to see whether she looked ruined. One card, from Lady Elspeth Vane, included a small line in careful handwriting, "If you require a loyal witness, send for me." Honoria held that one longer than the others. "You need not receive anyone," Lady Maud said. "No," Honoria replied. "But I cannot vanish. There is a difference between refusing spectacle and offering yourself to wolves. Then I shall choose the room and the hour." She selected one invitation from the pile, a meeting that afternoon of the Street Bartholomew Ladies Relief Committee in a Mayfair drawing room, organized to raise funds for widows of injured sailors. It was respectable, public enough to be noticed, serious enough to shame obvious gossip, and filled with women who could spread a correction as efficiently as they spread a rumor. Lady Maud studied her. "You intend to go without the ring?" Honoria glanced at her bare hand. The absence had become the most visible thing about her. "If I wear a glove, they will say I hide the truth. If I stay home, they will say I confess it. If I go, they must look at me while inventing lies. That is a hard road." "I know." Lady Maud's gaze softened. "Then we shall take my carriage. Mine is less grand. It gives them less to resent." At Westmere House, while Honoria chose public dignity over concealment, Lady Cecily Ardane stood in the private morning room and rearranged a vase by half an inch. She had always liked that room. It was not the grandest chamber in the house, but it was the one through which influence passed quietly: household notes, invitations, replies to tradesmen, seating plans, private stationery, keys left in drawers by people who trusted routine. She wore pale lavender and an expression of delicate concern when Gideon entered without being announced. That alone told her something had changed. "Gideon," she said, turning with perfect surprise. "I was hoping you had rested. Last night was distressing for everyone." "Was it?" His voice was even. "I had thought you found it instructive." A flicker. "Gone almost immediately." "I don't know what you mean." "No. I begin to suspect you know exactly what things mean before other people understand they have been arranged." Cecily lowered her eyes with the practiced sadness of a woman too refined for accusation. "If this is about Honoria, you must not blame yourself beyond reason. Some wives require firmness. She has been indulged in her pride, perhaps because you wish to be kind." Gideon looked at the desk. The private stationery drawer was closed. The key was not in it. "Do not speak to me of my wife's pride." Cecily became very still. "Your wife left your ring before guests. After I gave her cause. You made one unfortunate remark. I made a public wound." She moved closer, not too close, just enough to suggest family intimacy. "Then mend it privately. Let her learn obedience without letting society see the lesson. If she returns too easily, they will call you weak. If she remains away, they will call her ungrateful. You must control the appearance before it controls you." Gideon turned from the desk. "Who had the morning room key during the first month after my marriage?" Cecily's face did not alter, but her hand tightened around the lavender ribbon at her waist. "How should I know? Mrs. Havisham keeps such things. You wrote here often." "At your mother's old desk, yes. You invited me to treat Westmere House as family. I invited you to write letters. I did not invite you to govern my marriage." The words landed with more force because he did not raise his voice. Cecily's eyes shone suddenly, though whether with injury or anger, Gideon could not tell. "I've only ever protected you." "From whom?" he asked. She looked at him then, directly. "From being made a fool by a woman who wanted your name more than your heart." For a moment, the old belief stirred, not because he trusted Cecily now, but because shame often reached for familiar lies. Then Gideon saw Honoria in Lady Maud's drawing room, barehanded and upright, asking whether his concern was for her or for his house. He had failed to answer quickly enough. He would not fail twice in the same way. "If you hear any person speak of her grace as if she were a beggar for my name, correct them," he said. "If you cannot correct them, remove yourself from their company." Cecily's lips parted. "You're defending her?" "I am late in doing so." He left before she could reply, and for the first time since she had entered Westmere House as its useful cousin, Lady Cecily stood in the morning room and understood that silence could also move against her. That afternoon, Honoria entered Lady Tresham's Mayfair drawing room on Lady Maud's arm. Conversation did not stop all at once. That would have been vulgar. It faltered in stages. A sentence ended too soon near the pianoforte. A teacup paused halfway to painted lips. Two young matrons looked at Honoria's left hand, then away, then back again with the helplessness of those trained to notice jewels more than grief. Honoria gave her card to the hostess and thanked her for receiving them. Her voice did not tremble. The committee table was covered in subscription lists, folded letters, and small purses of donations. This helped. Practical work gave women permission not to stare. Honoria took a chair beside Lady Elspeth Vane and asked about the widow's accounts. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing improper was said. That was almost worse. The room filled with unsaid things, crowded as a ball. Then Lord Osbertvail's sister, Mrs. Diana Crowell, smiled over her teacup. "How admirable of your Grace to attend. Some ladies would have remained at home after such a trying misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Honoria asked. "One hopes it was nothing more. Hope is very generous when one has not troubled to learn the truth." A faint colour touched Mrs. Crowell's cheeks. Lady Maud did not smile, but her eyes warmed. Before the exchange could deepen, the door opened, and Gideon Ainsworth was announced. A duke at a ladies' committee was unusual enough to disturb every calculation in the room. Gideon bowed to the hostess, offered a donation for the widow's fund, and did not look first at the empty chair beside Honoria. He looked at the women who had been looking at her hand. "Ladies," he said, "I am grateful Her Grace chose to lend her judgment today. Westmere will double whatever sum the committee raises by the end of the week." The room shifted. Money was not affection. Honoria knew that. Yet he had spoken of her judgment, not her obedience, not her return, not his authority. He had placed value where others had placed appetite. Mrs. Crowell lowered her gaze. Lady Elspeth murmured, "How generous." Gideon moved to stand a respectful distance behind Honoria's chair, close enough to be seen, not close enough to claim. She did not thank him. Not aloud. But when one of the subscription sheets slid from the table, he caught it before it fell and placed it beside her hand without touching her. The restraint was so careful that it hurt. As the meeting ended, a young maid in Lady Tresham's livery approached Lady Maud with a folded shawl. Her face was pale. "Begging your pardon, my lady," she whispered, "but I was once in service at Westmere House." Honoria turned. Gideon became utterly still. The maid's fingers twisted in the shawl fringe. "I didn't mean to listen, Your Grace. But I heard talk below stairs today. There was a girl dismissed last winter. Elsie Finch. She said Lady Cecily had her fetch the morning room key twice when Her Grace was away visiting the modiste." Honoria felt the room narrow around the words. Gideon's eyes met hers, and this time he did not look away from the truth arriving between them. The maid's name was Rose Tallow, and fear made her curtsy twice before Gideon could ask a single question. Lady Tresham's drawing room had not been meant for revelations. It held subscription lists, teacups, and the soft hum of women pretending charity made them immune to scandal. Yet the moment Rose mentioned Elsie Finch and the morning room key, every polite object in the room seemed to acquire a sharper edge. Honoria did not question the maid there. Neither did Gideon. He saw at once what Honoria had already understood. A frightened servant could be ruined by one careless inquiry spoken within reach of the wrong ears. "Thank you," Honoria said gently. "You have done nothing improper by telling the truth." Rose's eyes filled with startled relief. "I don't want trouble, Your Grace." "Then you shall not be made the price of it." Gideon turned to Lady Traceham with a bow so formal it silenced even the most curious guests. Lady Traceham, I beg your pardon for disturbing your committee. Westmere will send the promised sum by messenger before evening. It was a dismissal without seeming to be one. Within minutes, Lady Maud had escorted Honoria to her carriage, Rose had been sent back to her duties with no name repeated aloud, and Gideon had remained behind only long enough to instruct his own groom to locate Elsie Finch quietly. The next morning, however, London did what London always did. It filled the spaces between facts with appetite. By noon, another society paragraph had appeared, cleverer than the first and crueler because it pretended restraint. One may admire charity in a lady who has misplaced domestic harmony, yet some ornaments are more conspicuous in absence than in display. No title was printed. No name was required. Honoria read it in Lady Maud's breakfast room with the same hand that had once trembled over Gideon's forged letter. This time, she did not tremble. They are speaking of my finger now, she said. Lady Maud folded the newspaper with a snap. Then let them look at your face instead. Honoria lifted her eyes. The musical is tonight. Lady Penhurst's. Yes. If I do not attend, Cecily will say shame kept me away. Lady Maud watched her for a long moment. And if you do attend, she will try to make shame sit beside you. Then I shall not give it a chair. That evening, Lady Penhurst's house in Mayfair glittered with enough candles to flatter every complexion and conceal no cruelty at all. The musical had drawn a carefully chosen crowd, ladies who preferred whispers to card tables, gentlemen who enjoyed appearing cultivated, and a few older dowagers who could destroy a reputation without lifting their voices above the rustle of silk. Honoria entered on Lady Maud's arm wearing ivory muslin with a narrow blue sash, simple enough to deny theatricality, dignified enough to remind the room that she was still Duchess of Westmere. She wore gloves. That did not help. Everyone looked at her left hand anyway. The ring was not there. Its absence travelled faster than the music. A lady near the pianoforte lowered her fan. A gentleman glanced away too late. Mrs. Diana Crowell whispered something to her companion and then smiled as if the smile had been an accident. Honoria crossed the room without hurry. Every step felt measured against the memory of the dining table, but she would not let Westmere House be the last room in which society saw her. Lady Penhurst greeted her with a kindness made careful by fear. Your Grace, how good of you to come. Music is a comfort when conversation grows careless, Honoria replied. The older woman blinked, then gave a small, approving nod. Lady Maud's mouth twitched. They had taken seats near the second row when Lady Cecily Ardane arrived in pale green silk, serene as a chapel window and twice as cold. She did not approach at once. That was not her style. She let herself be seen first, accepted two greetings, touched Mrs. Crowell's arm, and then drifted near Honoria as if drawn by concern. My dear Honoria, she said, her voice pitched for the surrounding chairs. You look well. I confess, I've worried that pride might keep you from company. Honoria looked toward the musicians tuning their instruments. Pride is often blamed when dignity refuses to collapse. A soft cough came from behind a fan. Cecily's eyes brightened. She enjoyed a room that listened. How beautifully put. Though one must be cautious. Some wives mistake pride for virtue, and some husbands are too honourable to correct them publicly. Lady Maud's fingers tightened on her reticule, but Honoria touched her aunt's wrist once. Not yet. Lord Osbert Vale had arrived and positioned himself near the mantel with an expression of lazy amusement. Surely everyone agrees, he said, that harmony in marriage is best maintained when each party remembers the arrangement. A wife has security, a husband has order, and society is spared unnecessary drama. How economical of you, Lord Osbert, Honoria said. You have reduced a sacrament to a ledger. Several heads turned. Osbert's smile sharpened. I only speak practically, Your Grace. A wedding ring is not a poem. It is proof of a vow. The room drew in one silent breath. There it was. At last. The word he wanted. The object everyone had pretended not to see. Honoria turned fully toward him. Her pulse was steady now. Strange, how public cruelty could clarify what private pain had blurred. Is a wedding ring proof of obedience, my lord, or proof of a vow kept by both? The sentence crossed the room more cleanly than music. It reached the dowagers first, then the young ladies, then the gentleman who suddenly found the carpet interesting. Lady Cecily's smile vanished for less than a second. Osbert looked prepared to laugh, but no one gave him permission. Honoria continued, not loudly, not angrily. That would have comforted them. If a woman wears a ring while being dishonored, society calls her dutiful. If she removes it after being dishonored, society calls her proud. How convenient that the woman is judged in both cases and the wound itself is treated as decoration. Someone near the doorway moved. Honoria did not need to turn to know who had entered. The room knew before she did. Conversations died in soft fragments. Gideon Ainsworth, Duke of Westmere, stood beneath the archway in dark evening dress, his face controlled, his eyes fixed not on Cecily, not on Osbert, but on Honoria. He had heard enough. Perhaps all. Lord Osbert recovered first because foolish men often mistook silence for opportunity. Westmere, I was merely observing that Her Grace's present situation invites discussion. Gideon walked forward with measured steps. Then I shall close the invitation. Osbert's colour changed. Gideon stopped beside Honoria's chair, not in front of her. The distinction mattered. He did not hide her. He stood where everyone could see that she remained visible. No one in this room, he said, will refer to the Duchess of Westmere as if she were a dependent seeking coin, a disobedient child, or an ornament fallen out of place. Cecily placed a hand lightly against her breast. Gideon, no one meant harm. We are all distressed for you. Do not borrow my distress to sharpen your kindness. A murmur moved and died. Honoria felt his presence beside her like heat held behind glass. Once, such protection would have made her hope too quickly. Tonight, she accepted it as one accepts a cloak in bitter air, useful but not enough to call the weather kind. She rose. Gideon stepped back at once, giving her room before she asked for it. That, more than his public rebuke, nearly unsettled her. His Grace is correct, Honoria said. I am not a dependent. I am not a child. I am not an ornament, though some rooms have treated me as one. I remain Duchess of Westmere. What I do not remain is silent for the comfort of those who prefer a wounded woman to bleed politely. Lady Penhurst's eyes widened. Lady Maud looked proud enough to frighten half of Mayfair. Cecily's composure held, but the strain beneath it had become visible. Honoria inclined her head to the hostess. Forgive me, Lady Penhurst. I fear we have delayed the music. Not at all, Your Grace, Lady Penhurst said, faintly breathless. I believe the room is better prepared to listen. The first notes of the pianoforte began at last, delicate and almost absurd after so much truth. Honoria resumed her seat, and Gideon remained standing behind her, not touching her chair, not claiming forgiveness by proximity. When the song ended, he bent slightly, his voice low enough for her alone. You should never have had to defend yourself against a wound, I began. Honoria looked ahead at the empty music stand. No, she said. I should not have. He accepted the answer without protest. A footman appeared near the doorway and signaled discreetly to Gideon. The Duke stepped away, received a folded note, and read it once. His expression hardened. When he returned, he did not conceal the paper from her. Mr. Pember has sent word, he said. The anonymous note to the paper was written on Westmere House paper. Honoria looked across the room. Lady Cecily was speaking to Mrs. Crowell, her smile restored, her eyes watchful. Then the house that erased me, Honoria said quietly, has begun to testify. The next morning, Westmere House looked almost innocent. Sunlight entered through the tall front windows and lay across the marble hall as if nothing cruel had ever been said beneath its roof. Servants moved softly from room to room. Coal scuttles were carried. Breakfast trays were cleared. The great house resumed its habits because houses, unlike hearts, did not pause when something broke. Gideon stood in the private morning room with Mr. Pember's note in his hand and felt, for the first time in years, that his own walls had become witnesses against him. The anonymous paragraph had been written on Westmere paper. The forged letter had been written on Westmere paper. Rose Tallow had named Elsie Finch and the morning room key. Each fact was small, respectable, and impossible to ignore. Mr. Pember, a dry, careful man whose grey hair and plain coat made him seem more like a ledger given human shape than a solicitor, examined the desk drawer without touching anything unnecessary. "Your Grace, the supply here is diminished." Gideon looked at the neat stack of cream paper. "By how much?" "Enough to write several letters and ruin one household." Gideon did not answer. A younger footman appeared at the door, pale with the terror of being important. "Your Grace, Mrs. Havisham begs a word." "Something has been found in her Grace's former sitting room." "Former." The word entered Gideon like a verdict. He had not ordered Honoria's sitting room disturbed since she left. No one had dared call it abandoned, not to his face. He followed the footman up the stairs, Mr. Pember behind him, and found Mrs. Havisham waiting outside the small blue sitting room Honoria had once used for correspondence and reading. The housekeeper's face was composed, but her eyes were troubled. "I asked the maids to dust only, Your Grace." No drawer was to be opened. But this was beneath the cushion of the window seat. She held out a packet tied with pale ribbon. Gideon knew before he touched it that the ribbon was too clean. Too deliberate. Mr. Pember noticed it as well. "Conveniently placed," he murmured. Gideon untied the packet. Inside were 3 letters, all in a hand that resembled Honoria's closely enough to make his throat close. The first spoke of separate maintenance. The second hinted that a woman could use public pity to secure influence over dower property. The third was worst of all, because it made Honoria seem calculating in the very language that had first condemned her. A wife undervalued by a proud husband may yet turn neglect into advantage. Gideon read that line once. His mind recoiled from it. Then, shamefully, another part of him measured the hand, the phrasing, the paper, and hesitated. 1 second. Perhaps 2. Long enough for the old poison to lift its head. Mr. Pember saw the hesitation. "Your Grace." Gideon folded the letter with care so severe it nearly tore the paper. "Say it." Fresh ink leaves confidence where aid should leave surrender. The solicitor held one sheet near the light. "This was not written when it claims to have been written." Mrs. Havisham drew in a breath. "Then someone put it there." Gideon looked around the blue sitting room. He saw the chair where Honoria had read alone. The little table where she had once left a pressed violet in a book which he had noticed and never mentioned. The empty space on the mantel where she had placed a porcelain figure from Bellamy Lodge before Cecily suggested it was sentimental clutter. He had not known that detail until now. He had not known because he had trained himself not to ask. "Seal this room," he said. "No one enters without my permission. Not Lady Cecily. Not Lord Osbert. No one." Mrs. Havisham curtsied. Relief crossed her face before discipline hid it. Mr. Pember gathered the packet into his leather case. "Will you take this to her Grace?" Gideon looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, London moved under a clear sky, already arranging new judgments. "Yes," he said. "And God help me if I ask her to prove herself again." Yet when he reached Lady Maud's townhouse an hour later, the old failing arrived before courage could bar the door. Honoria received him in the front drawing-room, Lady Maud near the window, her embroidery lying untouched as usual. Honoria wore a dark blue morning gown today. No ring. No softness arranged for his comfort. She looked rested enough to stand and wounded enough not to be fooled. Gideon placed the packet on the table between them. "It was found at Westmere House." Honoria did not touch it. "Where?" "In your sitting room." Her eyes sharpened. "My sitting room was searched." "No. A maid found it beneath the window seat." Lady Maud gave a short, humorless sound. "A hiding place selected by someone who reads porn novels." Gideon should have smiled. He could not. Honoria untied the packet and read the first letter. Then the second. With each page, her face became stiller. Not colder. Stiller. Gideon had learned the difference too late. "I did not write these," she said. "I know." The answer came quickly. Too quickly perhaps, because she looked at him then, and there it was. She had seen what had happened before he spoke. Not accusation. Worse. Recognition. You looked at them first, she said. Yes. And for a moment, you wondered. He could have lied. A year ago, he might have called the question unfair. He might have retreated behind rank, injury, and the cowardice of wounded pride. Now the ring in his pocket seemed to burn through the cloth. Yes, he said. For a moment, I did. Honoria closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had withdrawn that his apology had not yet reached. Thank you for telling the truth. The words were polite. They were devastating. Honoria, I did not believe them. You did not believe them long enough to accuse me. That is progress, I suppose. It was a moment. It was the same moment that has lasted a year. Silence followed, clean and merciless. Lady Maud did not rescue either of them. Gideon felt the full shape of his failure then. Not merely the insult. Not merely the forged letter. His crime had been deeper. He had made suspicion the first language of their marriage and then asked why affection had not answered. Honoria placed the letters back on the table. You have learned regret, Your Grace. You have not yet learned trust. The title struck harder than his name would have. Gideon stepped forward, then stopped before movement became pressure. Do not go back into hiding because of this. I am not hiding. Then stay in London. Let me protect you from whatever Cecily intends next. Protect me? Her voice did not rise. You still think protection means keeping me where you can see me? That is not what I meant. It is what fear means before it learns better words. Lady Maud's gaze moved to Honoria, not in warning, but in support. Honoria stood. I shall leave London for Bellamy Lodge in Kent this afternoon. Gideon's control broke by a fraction. Today? Yes. Society will decide you are fleeing. Society has decided many things without my assistance. Cecily will use your absence. Then let her reveal what she needs me absent to attempt. Gideon understood the strategy and hated the cost. Honoria was not retreating into shame. She was removing herself from a room where every new paper could be planted under her cushion and every doubt could be measured against her face. I will send outriders, he said. No, the roads are safe enough, but I will not have you travel with only your aunt's carriage. Lady Maud's servants are sufficient. Honoria. The plea in his voice surprised them both. She looked at him, and for a heartbeat he saw the woman from the chapel at Larchford Hall, brave enough to hope before he had given her cause. Then she was gone, replaced by the woman he had made and failed to know. I am leaving because I will not stand in your house, or in your city, and wait to be believed correctly. If you wish to help, seal those letters. Find who placed them. Find who had the key. And do not ask me to pay for your investigation with my presence. He bowed his head. I will do as you ask. No, she said softly. Do what is right. There is a difference. By late afternoon, her trunks were strapped behind Lady Maud's carriage, and the sky had lowered into a grey promise of rain. Gideon stood on the pavement outside the Bloomsbury townhouse, the forged packet locked in Mr. Pember's case, the Westmere ring still in his pocket. Honoria paused at the carriage door and handed him a folded list. The people who had reason or permission to enter the morning room, she said. Mrs. Havisham will know the rest. He accepted it. Their fingers did not touch. Will you write when you arrive? Lady Maud will send word. He deserved that distance. Knowing it did not make it lighter. Honoria, I am trying. I know. That kindness nearly undid him. Then she added, but I cannot live inside your trying. She entered the carriage. Lady Maud followed. The door closed. Gideon stood in the street as the wheels began to turn, and the distance that opened between them felt wider than the road to Kent. In the carriage, Honoria sat very straight until Bloomsbury blurred behind the glass. Only then did she look down at her empty hand and whisper, not to her aunt, not to Gideon, but to the woman she had almost forgotten beneath the title, not again. Bellamy Lodge had never pretended to be grand, and that was why Honoria trusted it. The house stood in Kent among bare orchards and low stone walls, its brick front softened by ivy and its windows looking toward fields that had known more honest weather than London drawing rooms. It had belonged to the Bellamy family long before debt had taught them humility, and though the carpets were faded and the silver was thin, every room seemed to remember her before she had become Duchess of Westmere. Lady Maud established herself in the breakfast parlour with a writing slope, 2 sharpened pencils, and the air of a general preparing a campaign. Honoria sat opposite with the forged letters laid out in a careful row, not because she wished to touch them, but because she refused to fear paper any longer. "The hand is clever," Lady Maud said, peering over her spectacles. "Too clever. A person who imitates affection badly often imitates handwriting well. It requires less soul." Honoria's mouth almost softened. "Then we shall begin with what has no soul. Paper, ink, access, opportunity." She took the list she had given Gideon and copied it again from memory. Mrs. Havisham. The butler. Gideon's secretary. Lady Cecily. Herself. Then she added a name in smaller writing, Elsie Finch. The under-housemaid dismissed last winter. Honoria had not known Elsie well. That troubled her now. In a great house, a duchess might pass a girl on the stairs 100 times and still fail to know whether that girl was frightened, hungry, or being pressed into silence by someone with a softer voice and sharper power. Honoria remembered a thin face, brown hair tucked severely beneath a cap, and hands that always looked scrubbed raw. She remembered, too late, that Elsie had once dropped a coal scuttle near the morning room door and gone white when Cecily appeared behind her. If Cecily dismissed her, Honoria said, then she may be in difficulty. "Most dismissed maids are," Lady Maud replied. "That is why people dismiss them when they wish a secret to remain poor." Honoria rang for the housemaid and asked for the steward's boy to ride with a note to the village where Rose Tallow had said Elsie might be living with an aunt. She wrote the note herself, not as a command from a duchess, but as an offer from a woman who would not expose another woman without protection. By afternoon, rain had begun to tap softly against the panes, and Elsie Finch arrived in a borrowed cloak, muddy at the hem, twisting her bonnet ribbons until Honoria thought they might tear. The girl froze at the parlour door when she saw Lady Maud. Then her eyes darted to Honoria's bare hand. "Your Grace," she whispered. "I didn't steal anything." The words were so immediate that something in Honoria's chest hurt. "I have not sent for you to accuse you." Elsie did not look reassured. "Lady Cecily said I was clumsy and ungrateful. She said no good house would take me if I talked." Lady Maud's face became very still. Honoria gestured to the chair nearest the fire. "Sit down, Elsie. You will have tea before you answer anything. And if you choose to answer nothing, you will still leave with a written character from me, provided you have told me only that you wish to be left in peace." The girl's eyes filled at once. She tried to hide it by sitting too quickly. "I don't know much. Often people who say that know the one thing others fear most." Elsie accepted a cup with shaking hands. Little by little, between sips and glances toward the door, she told them what she had seen. Twice during the early weeks of Honoria's marriage, Lady Cecily had asked her to fetch the morning room key from Mrs. Havisham's hook while claiming her grace required private stationery. Twice, Elsie had done it because a lady's command could sound like household law to a servant with no defense. The second time, Elsie had returned sooner than expected and found Lady Cecily at the desk, several sheets spread before her, one of Honoria's old notes lying open beside them. "I didn't read it," Elsie said quickly. "I swear I didn't. I only saw her Grace's name," and Lady Cecily turned so fast. She smiled at me, but it wasn't a kind smile. After that, I was blamed for a broken inkstand. I never touched it. Honoria listened without interrupting. Anger, when it came, was cold and useful. Not against Elsie. Against the ease with which a woman of rank could turn a servant's livelihood into a lock on her mouth. "Where did you go after Westmere House?" Honoria asked. "My aunt took me in. I sew when I can. I thought about going into service again, but Lady Cecily said she would see I was not received." Then Lady Cecily overestimated her reach. Honoria took a fresh sheet and wrote to Lady Elspeth Vane, who had a widowed sister in Surrey in need of a housemaid. She wrote clearly, praising Elsie's diligence and discretion, and sealed it with the small Bellamy seal rather than the Westmere one. Then she added a folded banknote, not enough to insult, enough to travel. Elsie stared at it as if it might disappear. I can't take that. You can, Honoria said. Not as payment for your story. As protection from the person who tried to make your honesty too costly. Elsie bowed her head over the letter. For the first time since the dining room at Westmere House, Honoria felt something within her settle. She had lost her ring, but not the right to use her hands for good. Gideon arrived near dusk, announced properly by card, his carriage stopping on the wet gravel with 2 outriders he had apparently sent no farther than the gate, as if obeying her refusal while worrying in the only language he knew. Lady Maud allowed him into the parlour after Elsie had been settled in the kitchen with supper and privacy. Mr. Pember's note came with him, folded inside his coat. Gideon looked first at Honoria, then at the papers on the table. His gaze did not linger on her bare hand this time. Perhaps he had learned that absence was not an invitation to stare. The ink from the packet found at Westmere House matches the ink in Lady Cecily's writing desk, he said. Mr. Pember is cautious, but he says the composition is too similar to dismiss. Lady Maud gave a satisfied sniff. Ink has more honesty than cousins. Honoria told him what Elsie had said. Gideon listened without once interrupting. When she finished, his face had gone hard in the way it had once gone hard at social discourtesy. This was different. This was not pride offended. It was justice waking late. I will see that Elsie is protected, he said. I have already begun, Honoria replied. You may add your support without taking over hers. He bowed his head. Of course. Those 2 words, simple and corrected, shifted something in the room. Not enough. But something. Later, when Lady Maud insisted that Gideon ride with Honoria as far as the lower Orchard Road to discuss the order of evidence while she followed in her own carriage with insight, propriety was maintained by distance, glass, and the aunt's merciless gaze. Inside Gideon's carriage, the rain made a soft veil over the windows. He sat opposite Honoria, not beside her. Between them, on a folded white handkerchief, he placed the Westmere ring. He did not push it toward her. He simply let it rest there, dark sapphire turned upward. I brought it because it belongs to you, he said. Not because I expect you to wear it. Honoria looked at the ring and felt, not surrender, but memory. It belonged to a vow before it belonged to me. Then I must answer for the vow. She raised her eyes to his. Answering is not the same as being forgiven. I know. The carriage rolled past the wet hedges. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Honoria said, I will help uncover the truth. I will stand beside you in that. But I am not returning to Westmere as your wife merely because the villain is becoming visible. His hand closed once over his knee. What are you returning as? She looked at the ring on the handkerchief. As a woman who requires the truth before she can decide whether the vow still has a home. The carriage slowed at the Orchard Road, where Lady Maud's carriage waited behind them like a chaperone carved from judgment. Gideon picked up the ring only after Honoria made no move toward it. Then I will bring you truth, he said. No, she answered softly. Bring it to the light. Let everyone see it. That is how you begin. By the time Honoria returned to London, she had learned that distance did not soften a scandal. It only gave society room to embroider it. Lady Maud's carriage entered Bloomsbury under a pale afternoon sky, its wheels hissing over damp stone, while Gideon's carriage took a separate road toward Mayfair to preserve every outward propriety that had become necessary between husband and wife. That care mattered. Honoria noticed it. She did not mistake it for healing. Lady Maud's townhouse received her like a held breath, quiet, modest, and guarded. On the hall table waited 3 calling cards, one invitation withdrawn with false regret, and a folded note from Lady Elspeth Vane warning that Lady Cecily had been speaking of a family resolution at Westmere House. The phrase looked harmless until one understood what families did to women in the name of resolution. She means to summon witnesses before we summon truth, Lady Maud said, reading over Honoria's shoulder. Yes, Honoria replied. And she will make concern sound like mercy. She removed her gloves and looked at her left hand. The absence of the ring no longer shocked her. It had become a discipline, like speaking plainly after years of polite answers. Before dusk, Gideon's card arrived. Lady Maud permitted him to enter the front drawing room, where Honoria waited beside a small writing table covered not in flowers, but in evidence, the copied phrases from her original letter to Arabella, Mr. Pember's notes on the watermark, Elsie Finch signed account, and a narrow scrap on which Rose Tallow had written the date she had heard the servant speak of the morning room key. Gideon stopped when he saw the arrangement. "You have made a case," he said. "No," Honoria answered. "I have made it harder for anyone to call truth emotion." His eyes moved to her face. "Cecily has invited Lady Elspeth, Mrs. Crowell, Lord Osbert, Lady Penhurst, and 2 cousins from my mother's family to Westmere House tomorrow afternoon. She claims the matter must be settled before more public damage is done." Lady Maud's mouth tightened. By settled, she means buried. Gideon looked toward the fire. "I intended to prevent the meeting." Honoria became still. "How?" "By forbidding it. Westmere House is mine. Cecily remains there by my tolerance, and Osbert has no standing under my roof. I can end the matter before she gathers an audience." It was a duke's answer. Efficient. Clean. Powerful. A month ago, perhaps even a week ago, Honoria might have felt protected by it. Now she heard what it would cost her. If Gideon silenced Cecily privately, London would continue to whisper that the Duchess had been dangerous enough to require concealment. If he turned the household key and closed the door, he might save his name while leaving hers half-stained. "No," she said. Gideon looked back at her. "No? You may stop Cecily from speaking in your house. You cannot stop what she has already taught others to think. I can correct them. Behind closed doors." The quiet question struck him harder than accusation would have done. He took one step toward the table, then stopped. He had learned that movement mattered now. "I do not want you exposed to another room arranged against you. I have already lived in rooms arranged against me." Her voice remained calm, but each word had a weight he could not escape. "The difference is that this time I will know why I am standing there." Lady Maud sat near the window, silent but intent, the most formidable chaperone in England. Gideon's jaw tightened. "They will watch you. They have watched me suffer politely. Let them watch me speak. Cecily will twist whatever she can. Then untwist it in daylight." He looked at the papers again. "You are asking me to let my family shame be made visible." "No," Honoria said. "I am asking whether my dignity matters more to you than the smooth surface of the House of Ainsworth." The room seemed to narrow around him. Gideon did not answer at once. Honoria did not rescue him from the pause. She had spent too much of her marriage filling silences he created. This silence belonged to him. At last, he said, "I wanted forgiveness before I had earned truth." The words were low. Unadorned. Lady Maud looked down at her embroidery as if granting them the mercy of not watching too closely. Honoria felt something in her chest shift, not open, but listen. "Yes," she said. Gideon lifted his eyes. "Then tomorrow we do it in the drawing room. Not as Cecily intends. As you require." She held his gaze. "Not as I require. As truth requires. Then truth will have witnesses." He drew a folded paper from his coat. Mr. Pember found something more. A practice sheet. Several lines in a hand attempting to match yours. He believes it came from the waste collected near Cecily's writing desk, though he will not claim more than he can prove. Honoria took the paper without touching his fingers. The lines were not full sentences. Loops, downstrokes. Her own H repeated in varying degrees of failure. Her breath caught, but not from fear. This was the villain's hand becoming visible. Does Cecily know he has it? No good. Lady Maud leaned forward. "Who will attend on our side?" Gideon answered with the precision of a man who had turned command toward justice at last. "Mr. Pember. Mrs. Havisham if needed. Lady Elspeth, who has already offered loyalty. Lady Penhurst, because she heard the attack at the music-hall. You, Lady Maud, if you will stand with her grace." "I shall sit beside her," Lady Maud said. "Standing is too easy. Sitting implies I intend to remain." A faint breath almost escaped Honoria. Not laughter. Something near it. Gideon saw it and did not try to claim it. That restraint touched her more than any speech might have. And the ring? Lady Maud asked suddenly. Gideon's hand moved to his coat pocket, then stilled. Honoria felt the air change. It should be present, she said. The words surprised her, but she knew they were true as soon as she spoke them. Not on my hand. On the table. Let them see what was left there. Let them understand that it was not a tantrum, not a performance, not an ornament misplaced. It was a vow returned because it had been made empty. Gideon's face tightened with pain, but he nodded. I will place it there. No, Honoria said softly. I will. He looked at her then, and the distance between them seemed filled with every version of the woman he had failed to see. Of course. The two words were quiet, but they held surrender, not defeat. Something gentler moved through the room. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the shape of a path. Honoria gathered the practice sheet and set it with the other evidence. Then tomorrow I will come to Westmere House. You need not enter by the servant's side or any private door, Gideon said. You will enter through the front, as Duchess. I was always Duchess. Yes, he said. You were. I was the one who forgot what that demanded of me. She looked at him for a long moment. The name rose before she could decide whether to permit it. Gideon. His expression changed as if she had opened a shutter in a darkened room. Yes? Do not defend me tomorrow because you are ashamed. He swallowed. Then why? Defend the truth because you believe it before everyone else is forced to. He bowed his head, not as a duke receiving instruction from no one, but as a man accepting the condition of any future he might still hope to deserve. I will. The next afternoon, Westmere House waited under a sky the colour of pewter. Honoria arrived with Lady Maud at her side and entered through the front doors. No servant looked surprised. Gideon had seen to that. The drawing-room doors stood open, and beyond them gathered the selected witnesses, their voices low, their curiosity wrapped in silk. Lady Cecily stood near the mantel in pale green, serene and ready to preside over another woman's humiliation. Then she saw the small table placed at the centre of the room. Upon it lay the Westmere ring, dark sapphire turned upward beneath the afternoon light. For the first time, Lady Cecily's smile failed before anyone spoke. For a moment, the Westmere drawing-room belonged to the ring. Not to the Duke whose house held it. Not to Lady Cecily, who had arranged the afternoon as if it were another table where Honoria might be seated too low. Not even to the curious witnesses gathered beneath the painted ceiling, their silk skirts and polished shoes forming a soft barrier around the truth. The old gold lay upon the small table at the centre of the room, dark sapphire catching the grey afternoon light from the tall windows. It looked smaller than scandal should have looked. It looked too quiet to have carried so much pain. Honoria stood beside it, not behind Gideon, not hidden by Lady Maud, not tucked into the corner where society preferred its inconvenient women. Her gloved hands were still. Her face was calm. She had entered Westmere House through the front doors as Duchess, and every servant in the hall had bowed as if reminded that she had never ceased to be mistress here merely because others had found her absence useful. Lady Cecily recovered first, but only because she had practiced recovery all her life. My dear Honoria, she said, her voice carrying the sorrowful sweetness that had once passed for kindness in this house. How dramatic! I had hoped we might discuss this matter with delicacy. Delicacy, Lady Maud said from her chair, is often the curtain drawn before an ugly window. A faint rustle moved through the room. Lady Elspeth Vane lowered her eyes to hide a smile. Mrs. Diana Crowell looked toward Lord Osbert Vale as if seeking instruction on whether to be amused or offended. Osbert stood near the mantel in the attitude of a gentleman prepared to enjoy disaster, though the ring had made even him more cautious. Gideon entered last. That had been deliberate. Honoria understood it only when he walked past Cecily without pausing and stopped not before the gathered guests, but beside the table where the ring lay. He did not touch it. Before any person in this room speaks of her Grace's conduct, he said, you will hear mine. No one answered. A duke did not need to ask for silence. He brought it with him. Cecily's brows lifted. Gideon, surely this isn't necessary. It is necessary because I made it necessary. The room cooled. Gideon turned enough that every witness could see his face. Honoria saw the effort in him, not to command, but to stay bare beneath judgment. Several nights ago, at my own table, in the hearing of guests, I spoke of my wife with cruelty. I used a word that made her dignity appear conditional upon my patience. That fault was mine. No person here will use that moment, or her leaving afterward, as proof of guilt, pride, greed, or disobedience. Cecily's colour changed by the smallest degree. No one has suggested guilt. Lady Maud made a dry sound. Not in plain words. That would require courage. Gideon did not look away from Cecily. I had not finished. Honoria felt the strange pressure of tears behind her eyes and refused them. Not because tears were weakness, but because this moment required vision. For nearly a year, she had wanted Gideon to understand what his distance had done. She had not imagined he would begin by naming it in front of others. He was not asking to be admired for confession. That mattered. He was standing where his pride could be struck. Lady Cecily folded her hands. If your Grace wishes to blame himself for an unfortunate phrase, no one can prevent it. But we are gathered because her Grace abandoned the household, removed the ring of her station, and permitted all London to speculate. Some settlement must be reached before the family suffers further injury. Honoria looked at Cecily then. Which family? The question was soft. It landed sharply. Cecily's mouth tightened. The House of Ainsworth, naturally. How generous of you to call it yours when convenient. Lord Osbert shifted near the mantel. That is hardly fair, Your Grace. Lady Cecily has served this house with uncommon loyalty. Gideon turned his head. You will have opportunity to defend loyalty after evidence has finished speaking. Mr. Pember stepped forward from near the bookcase, plain coat buttoned, leather case in hand. He had the unfortunate appearance of a man who could make a room uncomfortable by arranging papers. Lady Penhurst, seated beside Lady Elspeth, leaned forward despite herself. Cecily's gaze went to the leather case. For the first time, Honoria saw not fear, but calculation interrupted. These letters, Mr. Pember said, laying the first packet on the table, were used to shape his Grace's opinion of her Grace early in the marriage. This sheet appears to contain phrases taken from genuine private correspondence belonging to her Grace, then altered to suggest motives she denies and which the surrounding evidence does not support. Cecily's voice remained smooth. A denial is not evidence. No, Honoria said. That is why I brought more than my pain. Mr. Pember placed the forged letter beside a copy of the original lines Arabella Fane had returned by express messenger. He did not read every word aloud. He read only enough. Duty before comfort. Tolerable settlement. Leaving everything familiar. Then he read the forged version, where those phrases had been twisted into ambition, endurance, and contempt. The difference was so plain that the room seemed to flinch. Lady Elspeth pressed a hand to her throat. Mrs. Crowell's eyes darted towards Cecily. The handwriting is similar, Mr. Pember continued. Too similar for accident, not exact enough for innocence. More importantly, the paper used for both the first letter and a later anonymous paragraph bears the private watermark of Westmere House. It came from the morning room supply. Cecily gave a small laugh, perfectly timed to appear wounded. Many people had access to that room. I cannot imagine why this performance is directed at me. Because you brought the first letter to me, Gideon said. The words fell with a weight no document could match. You told me it had been misdirected. You advised me to understand my wife before she made a fool of me. Cecily's eyes shone. I was trying to protect you. From my wife. From being used. Honoria felt the old wound stir. Gideon answered before she could. No. You taught me to mistake her silence for calculation because it served you that I not ask her the truth. Cecily's mask slipped. Only for a breath. You were already willing to believe it. The room went utterly still. There it was, not confession, not denial, but something close enough to motive that even Cecily heard it after she had spoken. Gideon's face did not change, yet Honoria saw the words strike him. Yes, he said. I was. That is my shame. Not hers. Lady Maud looked at Honoria, and in that glance was a fierce, wordless approval. Mr. Pember placed another sheet on the table. This practice page was recovered from waste associated with Lady Cecily's writing desk. I make no claim beyond what the paper shows. Repeated attempts at Her Grace's capital H, the Bellamy B, and several phrases later appearing in the forged documents. Cecily stepped forward. This is outrageous. Scraps of handwriting, household gossip, are dismissed, made eager to please a duchess who can buy her gratitude. Honoria's voice came calmly. Elsie Finch was not bought. She was protected after being threatened. By you, Cecily said. How convenient. Yes, Honoria replied. It is convenient when a woman with power chooses not to crush someone with none. The answer quieted even Osbert. Gideon moved 1 inch nearer to the table, still not touching the ring. Elsie's account is held by Mr. Pember. Rose Tallow's statement confirms she heard the same matter discussed below stairs. Mrs. Havisham will testify that the morning room key was requested under false authority twice. Servant talk, Cecily said. You cannot place a duchess's reputation on servant talk when it suits you and then complain when society talks in return. Honoria looked at the ring. Its sapphire seemed darker now. I am not afraid of talk when truth is allowed to answer. Cecily turned suddenly to the witnesses. Even if every page were questioned, nothing explains what all of you saw with your own eyes. Her Grace removed the ring. She left her husband's table. She invited this scandal. Honoria placed her gloved fingertips lightly beside the ring, not on it. Yes, she said. Because a vow broken in public cannot be mended by silence. No one moved. The sentence seemed to pass through every person in the room and leave them less comfortable than before. Gideon's breath shifted beside her. He did not speak. He did not rescue her from the truth she had chosen to claim. That restraint felt like the first honest shelter he had ever given her. Then Lord Osbert Vale pushed away from the mantel, his composure returning with a sharper edge. Very moving, he said. But perhaps Her Grace should explain why she met a man alone in Kent. The accusation struck the room with the cold precision Lord Osbert had intended. Several women turned at once toward Honoria, not because they believed him, but because suspicion was a habit society practiced more faithfully than prayer. Lady Cecily lowered her gaze, but not before Honoria saw the smallest flare of relief cross her face. It was the look of a woman who had kept one last candle hidden and now believed it might burn the house down. Gideon did not turn to Honoria for explanation. He did not glance at Mr. Pember, or Lady Maud, or the ring on the table. He looked only at Osbert. No, he said. The word was quiet. It carried to every corner of the drawing room. Osbert blinked. No. No. You will not place filth in the air and ask my wife to breathe it before she has even been heard. Honoria felt the sentence enter her like warmth through frozen glass. Not because he had defended her. He had defended her before, after harm had been done. This was different. He believed her before the room demanded proof. Osbert gave a short laugh, though it lacked ease. I merely asked a reasonable question. You dressed malice as reason and hope breeding would make us accept it, Gideon replied. It won't. A stir moved through the room. Lady Maud leaned back in her chair, and for the first time that afternoon, she looked almost satisfied. Honoria lifted her chin. I will answer, not because Lord Osbert deserves it, but because truth should not be forced to hide when lies grow bold. In Kent, I met Mr. Pember's clerk, Mr. James Arlin, in the presence of Lady Maud and my aunt's housekeeper. He came to receive Elsie Finch's written account and to carry it safely to London. Mr. Pember stepped forward at once. That is correct. My clerk was sent under my direction. Lady Maud's signature appears as witness on the statement, as does that of Mrs. Barlow, housekeeper at Bellamy Lodge. Lady Maud's voice cut through the murmurs. If Lord Osbert considers a chaperone conversation with a solicitor's clerk improper, he must have led a life of astonishing delicacy. A few lips twitched. Osbert flushed. The timing seemed curious. So does your knowledge of it, Honoria said. That silenced him more effectively than anger would have done. Gideon turned slightly toward Mr. Pember. The invoice. Mr. Pember opened his leather case and removed a folded bill, handled so carefully that even the paper seemed nervous. This invoice was obtained from a stationer off Bond Street. It records the purchase of cream writing paper of a close match to the Westmere private supply, dark ink of the same composition as that used in the later packet, and sealing wax in a shade similar to Her Grace's ordinary correspondence. He looked over his spectacles. The purchase was made by Lord Osbert Vale. The room changed again. Earlier silences had been hungry, uncertain, eager. This one was judgment beginning to form. Osbert's face lost its practiced leisure. I purchase paper often. I write letters. How industrious of you, Lady Maud said. Mr. Pember placed another sheet beside the invoice. The stationer's boy remembered the order because the gentleman insisted the paper be cut to resemble the size of a household private sheet. The boy also recalled that Lord Osbert asked whether a watermark could be imitated. The stationer refused that part. Osbert looked towards Cecily before he could stop himself. It was a brief glance. It was enough. Cecily drew herself up. This is absurd. Lord Osbert may be foolish in many ways, but it does not follow that I had anything to do with his purchases. Then let him say so, Gideon said. Osbert's mouth tightened. His gaze moved from Gideon to the witnesses, then to Cecily, who no longer looked at him. A man of lesser rank could survive gossip only if someone greater kept him beneath protection. Osbert saw, all at once, that Cecily had none left to give. Lady Cecily asked for a favour, he said. The words came stiffly. Nothing more. Cecily's head turned. Osbert. You said it was a harmless correction to a vain woman's pride. He swallowed. You said the Duchess had taken what should have been yours. The sentence revealed more than he intended. Lady Elspeth gasped softly. Mrs. Crowle looked as if she wished to vanish into the wallpaper. Honoria did not move. She had expected jealousy. She had not expected the strange ache that came with hearing her life reduced to a prize another woman resented losing. Cecily's face had gone white beneath its polish. I meant my place in the household. My usefulness. I served Westmere House long before she arrived. You served yourself under its roof, Gideon said. Cecily's control cracked, not into tears, but into bitterness. And what did she do? She came with a title, a sad little family estate, and that silent face, and everyone was expected to bow. Your mother trusted me. The servants came to me. You listened to me. Then she arrived, and I was to become a visitor in the only house where I mattered. So you made me despise my wife, Gideon said. His voice was low, but the pain in it was public now. You gave me words she never wrote and let me build a marriage around them. You wanted to believe them, Cecily said. The cruelty of it struck true. Gideon absorbed it without retreating. Yes. I did. That is why my guilt stands beside yours, not behind it. Honoria looked at him then. There was no evasion in his face. No ducal mask. He had not used Cecily's villainy as a shield against his own failure. That, more than the evidence, changed the air between them. Gideon turned to the room. Lady Cecily Ardane will leave Westmere House before nightfall. She will not be received at Larchford Hall. No carriage, household account, introduction, allowance of convenience, or social protection will be extended to her under the name of Ainsworth. Cecily's lips parted. You cannot mean to cast me out. I mean to remove you from the house you used to injure its Duchess. He turned to Osbert. Lord Osbert Vale will receive no patronage, invitation, or support from this house. Those present may decide for themselves what value to place upon a gentleman who buys ink to stain a lady's name. Osbert looked around the room and found no rescue. The dowagers avoided his eyes. Lady Penhurst's expression had hardened into social death delivered with lace cuffs. Mr. Pember gathered the papers but left the first forged letter and the practice sheet visible. Proof remained on the table beside the ring, as if truth and vow had finally been forced to face each other. Gideon looked at Honoria. He did not reach for her. He did not soften his voice into intimacy that would pressure her before witnesses. Her Grace left my table because I wronged her. She removed the ring because I had made a public mockery of the vow it represented. She has not been faithless. She has not been greedy. She has not been false. She was wounded in my house, by words I spoke and lies I believed. Honoria's breath caught, but she stood still. Gideon continued, each sentence stripped of pride. I was wrong when I believed a letter over the woman I had married. I was wrong when I made courtesy a substitute for trust. I was wrong when I allowed another person to stand nearer to my confidence than my wife. And I was wrong when I spoke of her as if a wife could be tolerated instead of cherished. The room held silence differently now. It no longer leaned toward scandal. It bowed, unwillingly perhaps, toward truth. Gideon turned back to the witnesses. Let London hear this accurately. The Duchess of Westmere left because she was wronged. Any person who says otherwise will answer to the facts placed here today. Cecily made a sound, small and bitter, but no one moved toward her. Osbert stared at the floor. Lady Maud rose at last and crossed to Honoria's side. That single movement told the room the matter was not merely exposed. It was judged. Honoria looked down at the ring. The sapphire was no longer cold in the same way. It had become complicated, heavy with injury and possibility. She placed her fingertips lightly upon it. Gideon's eyes lowered to her hand, and she saw hope appear before he could hide it. She did not pick up the ring. Hope must learn patience too. You have given me back my name before them, she said, her voice steady. That matters. Gideon bowed his head. It is less than you deserve. Yes, she said, and several people seemed to stop breathing at her honesty. But it is a beginning. She lifted her hand from the ring and let it remain on the table. My heart will not be hurried because the truth has finally arrived. I know, Gideon said. The guests began to leave soon after, one by one, their farewell subdued, their faces altered by the knowledge that they had attended not a family correction, but a public reckoning. When the last carriage rolled away and the drawing-room stood nearly empty, Gideon remained beside the table. Honoria stood across from him, Lady Maud waiting near the door. The ring lay between them still. Gideon looked at it, then at her. When you choose where to go, I will send the carriage, he said. His voice was quiet enough now to belong only to her. Even if it's away from me. Honoria felt the ache of that, deep and dangerous. For the first time, his restraint did not feel like distance. It felt like respect. She nodded once, then left the ring where it was and walked out of the room with her aunt beside her, not as a woman fleeing shame, but as one who had finally made shame return to its rightful owners. 3 weeks passed before Honoria entered Larchford Hall again, and in those 3 weeks the world did not become gentle, but it became clearer. London learned the truth in the only way London ever learned anything, through drawing-room repetition, corrected whispers, altered invitations, and the sudden silence of people who had spoken too freely. Lady Cecily Ardane left Westmere House before nightfall on the day of the reckoning, departing not in tragic grandeur, but in the smaller humiliation of trunks carried quickly, servants who did not meet her eyes, and doors that would not open to her again. Lord Osbert Vale found that men who had laughed with him at club windows no longer remembered to offer him a chair. Lady Penhurst repeated the facts with a precision that made embroidery needles tremble. Lady Elspeth Vane wrote to 3 cousins, each more influential than the last, and by the end of a fortnight, the Duchess of Westmere was no longer described as difficult, proud, or dramatic. She was described, with the reluctant respect society reserved for women it had failed to crush, as wronged. Honoria did not rush back to her husband because society corrected itself. That would have been another kind of obedience. She remained first with Lady Maud in Bloomsbury, then travelled to Larchford Hall in Hampshire only when Gideon wrote a letter that contained no plea, no defence, and no command. I have restored your rooms, he wrote. I have dismissed those who served another authority above yours. I have enclosed documents for your review, not as persuasion, but as freedom. Come if you choose. Do not come if peace requires distance. The carriage will be yours either way. Lady Maud read the letter twice and sniffed. Better. Honoria looked at the signature, Gideon Ainsworth, not Westmere. Not enough. No, Lady Maud said. But better is sometimes the first honest brick in a road. So Honoria went, not as a defeated wife brought home, but as a woman visiting the life that had once been arranged around her silence. Lady Maud came with her, seated upright in the opposite corner of the carriage like a guardian of every unsaid boundary. When Larchford Hall appeared beyond the long avenue, its stone front softened by afternoon sun, Honoria felt memory rise with a sharpness that almost stopped her breath. She remembered arriving as a bride with hope folded carefully beneath duty. She remembered learning the corridors alone. She remembered believing that if she became useful enough, quiet enough, patient enough, love might one day notice her standing there. The carriage stopped before the entrance. Gideon waited on the steps. He did not come down to claim her hand. He bowed first to Lady Maud, then to Honoria, his face pale with restraint. "Welcome to Larchford Hall, Lady Maud." "Honoria." Her name no longer sounded like an accident in his mouth. "Your Grace," Lady Maud said. "I trust my room has a bell that rings loudly." "It does," Gideon replied. "And Mrs. Havisham has orders to answer it before you have cause to ring twice." Lady Maud examined him as if deciding whether improvement could be trusted in a duke. Wise man. Inside, the household lined the hall. Not excessively. Honoria would have hated that. Just the proper servants, the proper order, the proper recognition. Mrs. Havisham curtsied lower than before, not out of fear but with something like apology held in posture. "Your Grace, your apartments are prepared." Your apartments. Not His Grace's decision. Not Lady Cecily's former arrangement. Honoria looked up the staircase and saw, with a strange quiet astonishment, that the vase Cecily had once removed from the landing had been returned. The blue sitting room at the east side of the house had been restored as Honoria had first made it. Her books stood in their old place. The curtain she had chosen had been rehung. The little porcelain figure from Bellamy Lodge rested on the mantel, exactly where Cecily had once called it sentimental clutter. Honoria stood before it for a long moment. Gideon remained at the threshold, not entering until she glanced back. "Mrs. Havisham found it wrapped in paper in a storage cabinet," he said. "I should have asked why it disappeared." "You should have asked many things." "Yes." No protest. No flinch disguised as pride. Only acceptance. He placed a leather folder on the writing desk. "Mr. Pember prepared these. They clarify your pin money, your jointure rights, and an independent allowance held in your name. They also confirm that Bellamy Lodge will remain available to you without interference from me. They are not conditions." Honoria touched the folder but did not open it yet. "What are they, then?" "A door." His voice lowered. "One I should never have allowed you to think was locked." Lady Maud, who had been pretending to inspect the curtains, turned away with suspicious haste. Honoria did not thank him. Gratitude felt too small for this and too dangerous if offered too quickly. "I will read them. Take as long as you wish." He bowed and left her sitting room before tenderness could become pressure. That evening, no formal dinner was arranged. No guests waited to measure the distance between husband and wife. Honoria dined with Lady Maud in the smaller breakfast parlour, where Gideon joined them only after sending word asking whether his presence would be welcome. Lady Maud answered before Honoria could. "He may come. If he becomes foolish, I shall drop my spoon." Gideon came. He listened more than he spoke. When Honoria mentioned Elsie Finch's new position with Lady Elspeth's sister, he asked whether Elsie needed a travel allowance sent through Honoria, not from himself. When Lady Maud criticised the soup, he thanked her for the warning. It was almost ordinary. That made it more painful. Ordinary was what their marriage might have become if truth had not been strangled at the root. Later, as dusk settled over the estate, Honoria found a note beneath her chamber door. "The chapel will be open until 10. The ring is there. I will wait only if you wish me to." She stood with the note in her hand for several minutes. Then she went. The private chapel at Larchford Hall was small, older than the grand house around it, with worn stone beneath her slippers and narrow windows that held the last blue of evening. No guests. No servants. No Cecily. No watching room eager to turn feeling into gossip. Only Gideon standing beside a small wooden table near the front, and upon it, the Westmere ring. The sapphire did not glitter here. It rested quietly, as if humbled by candlelight. Gideon stepped back when she entered. "I wasn't certain you would come." Neither was I. The honesty did not wound him as it once might have. He accepted it like whether he had earned. Honoria approached the table. You could have given it to me in the drawing room. I had no right to make a public restoration feel like a public demand. She looked at him then. You have learned something. Not enough. No, she said. But enough to stand here differently. His breath moved slowly. I tolerated truth only when it spared my pride. You lived it when it cost you everything. The words were quiet, stripped of performance. Honoria felt them settle into the chapel, not as poetry, but as repentance shaped into language. I cannot return to the woman I was before that dinner, she said. I don't ask you to. I cannot love a man who needs me small so that his pride can stand tall. I don't want to be that man. Wanting is not becoming. I know. He looked toward the ring, then away from it, as though denying himself the comfort of hope. I will spend whatever years you allow proving that I understand the difference. Honoria touched the edge of the table. The wood was old, marked by generations of hands, vows, and griefs no one living could name. I am not coming back to the man who hurt me. Gideon's face tightened, but he did not interrupt. She lifted the ring. It was warm from the chapel air, not from his hand. That mattered. I am choosing the man who had the courage to become someone else after the harm was done. His eyes closed for one brief moment. When they opened, they held no triumph. Only reverence and relief held carefully in check. Honoria slid the ring onto her own finger. The sapphire settled against her hand, familiar and entirely changed. It did not feel light. It should not have. Some vows were heavier after truth, but weight was not the same as a chain. Gideon did not reach for her. He waited. Honoria looked at his hand, then placed hers forward, offering it by choice. Only then did he bend and press his lips to her ring fingers, so gently that the gesture felt less like possession than gratitude. Honoria, he whispered. I'm here, she said. Not where you place me. Where I choose to stand. Outside, Larchford Hall settled into evening. Inside the chapel, the ring no longer lay between them on a table, cold with accusation. It rested on the hand of a woman who had walked out with nothing but dignity and returned with the one thing no title could grant her. The freedom to choose.